What's up, guys? I am Dion Brown, and you are listening to and or watching Man versus Brand. All right, so I'm going to open this episode with an excerpt from my guest, Damian White's "I Made a Place for You." The passage is called "Balance Due." This is a book of poetry, and I think that this passage aptly explains not only what's going on in this episode, but what's going on with this podcast, what's going on in the world, what's going on in my individual life. And here we go. Give me more than I can handle. I can handle more than I give myself credit for. It's just debts told, pay or be payment. To whom do I owe my soul? So there is, I think, a shift in artistry that I'm noticing. I'm slightly older, guys, so I'm going to give you I'm an old man, I've seen this old man Kane type thing back in my day, right? So I'm gonna give you a back in my day spiel. So I sort of came into art around the time that Adobe had first started with Photoshop and Illustrator, and this sort of was maybe this predated a lot of digital art, where slam poetry competitions were happening. Folks really loved literature and writing, long form. Folks wrote poetry, folks painted, mixed mural art was coming out. Folks was creating a ton of theater type work using like cameras that they had at home. It was a lot of work. Like before the digital era, it took a lot to produce a piece of work. And I think that all forms of advancement, digital and or otherwise, is super important, right? Like innovation and advancement is the measure of a society's progress. So we then moved into the era of Adobe, which I think then sort of created this democratization of art, or this idea that almost everyone can do it, and everyone could have input into art, and folks could then critique others' arts because everyone had access to the same tools. And so when you have access to the same tools, everyone's producing and creating some really cool stuff. Well, now I think that there's this momentum to sort of bring back some of the more traditional forms, right? We saw this process kind of start in like the farm to table movement, in the artisanal items, like folks are hand making candles again. Then we saw proliferation of folks kind of saying, I'm going to embrace digital art while also simultaneously painting with more traditional tools. And now we come to the point where I think folks are like, I want to read again. And not only do I want to read, not only do I want the option for an audio book or a digital book, I also kind of want this. I want the copy that I can hold in my hand, that I can turn down and earmark the page of. I don't even know if earmark is really how that's supposed to be used, but fuck it, we're gonna do it. So folks are really kind of returning back to and embracing, I think, what at one point was considered antiquated, right? That in this era of digital artwork, of digital media, that you didn't really need to embrace some of the older techniques that we had leaned onto for most of civilization. Listen, we started in painting on cave walls with dye from flower petals and seeds, and now we're producing massive arts digitally. So it was kind of nice when Damian was kind enough to send me over I Made a Place for You. I was like, wow, this looks like a really awesome book. It has some really cool artwork that has a very particular point of view that matches the work inside, the written work. And then in the process of meeting him, I got a chance to learn more about his story and his background. And I think it's going to be really awesome share for you guys. Because on this platform, on this channel, we talk about creativity, we talk about entrepreneurship, and we talk about stories. And I think that Damian's his story is a compelling conversation around one, that we can create art in safe spaces, that we don't need to be tortured in order to produce. I think two, that the work that you have in your head, you can create at whatever point it is now then time to create that art. Sometimes you have art, sometimes you have work, sometimes you have a business idea in your head for 15, 20 years, and that's okay. And then thirdly, I just think that like there's a fear of production, right? Where we go, hey, what happens when this thing finally comes into fruition? When this thing finally is here, right? And what does that look like? How is it going to feel, right? And that fear of success. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, because I think his story is compelling in the way that once you get to the other side, there might be some beautiful things in store for you. So anyway, I'm going to shut up now, and I'm going to let Damian tell his own story. Damian, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Absolutely. Well, Dion, I'm super pumped to be here. I've been excited to have this conversation with you and bring my stories to your platform. So just a little bit about me. I'm from Columbus, Ohio. I'm 32. I don't know if people always share their age, but might as well time stamp this moment. I wrote this book out of almost necessity for clearing my conscience, getting ideas out that had been buried inside me for a long time. So I spent 3 months homeless in California in 2017 after losing my job. And I just had this reluctance to go home. I just didn't want to go home. I had built my identity around the idea that I was going to be independent, self-sustaining, and I would be able to go out there away from Ohio, live, 3,000, 2,000 miles away from my family and take care of myself. So at the moment where I had to decide, well, am I giving up that idea of myself or not? I refused. So I stayed in San Francisco. I lived on the streets. I ate the homeless shelters, slept in the parks. And it was a very humbling experience for me, because I had built a lot of my sense of self upon my diploma, my degree, my accolades, my sense of like accomplishment, those accomplishments that other people put on your shoulders. And there's those check boxes that you kind of like, I want to win this fellowship. I want to go to this, university. Or I want to do this, if you're an actor or something, I want to do this movie. I want to do this stadium. I want to do whatever those things are. I had checked off a bunch of those in my life. And so I was used to using that for my own leverage in a sense. Right. And then when I was homeless, that stuff didn't matter anymore. Nobody cared where I went to school, and nobody cared that I, had met Stephen Curry, or nobody cared that nobody cared about those things, what my thesis was about. So I had to redefine who I was in that moment. And that's basically the point where I had to figure out, who is Damian White right now? Who is Damian White without all of those things? And upon my journey of getting back home, I'll, fast forward a little bit. I ended up in a few dangerous situations and realizing that my life would end if I didn't go home. Like I would die in San Francisco. And so at that point, I decided that I had to figure out what to do. There was a program in San Francisco that if you had someone you could call in your hometown and they said like, yes, I will receive this person, then they would pay, then the state would pay for your Greyhound ticket to go home. And so I used that program to get home, and just been getting back on the right track ever since then. And so I'm super pumped to talk to you about the book and like even more about how that came out of all those experiences.
All right, cool, man. Thank you for sharing that. So, I kind of want to start with this idea of you deciding that being independent, living independently in California would be, sort of this foundation that you would build this life off of. What was that driven by? Like what sort of propelled you to move out of your hometown and journey? Like was San Francisco the end destination? Is that where you ended up? Were you just like, I need to go somewhere, and just figured out where that somewhere would eventually be? or did you sort of go for a purpose and then that purpose got derailed, which eventually led you to being homeless?
Yeah, so I was actually working for a nonprofit media company, and we shared Black History news stories. And we had a partner out in San Francisco, and so I was the liaison from our company to go work there. So I went and moved there for it was a 2 year, supposed to be a 2 year contract that ended about after a year and a half. And so I was working downtown San Francisco, and then when the contract ended, I didn't really know what to do, and that's kind of why. But the reason why I went to San Francisco was for work.
Got it. All right. So you were thriving in San Francisco, right? And anyone knows that that's been, through this thing called life, right? It's kind of hard sometimes when you're thriving in one space to then reconcile that the things that allowed you to thrive may not necessarily be playing a part in your current existence, right? So, man, I was able to afford this sort of rent, eat at these places, do these things, hang with these people. Now that sort of source of support is gone. I now have to make a determination whether I find another similar source of support or whether a similar source of support is available to me, right? Sometimes it's not about finding it, it's about whether it's available to you. And or do I turn around and go back to where I'm from and sort of acquiesce this life that I feel like is mine to live, because my circumstances change. So you lose the job, right? The contract ends, and you had, I guess, I would imagine like a decision to make, right? Like, do I stay and tough this out, or do I go home, or do I go somewhere else? So what were the things that really sort of led you to stay? Like, even though you know that this contract was ending, what were the thoughts in your mind that said, hey, this could really be the place for you. We just need to make this work.
Yeah, it's tough because I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like I didn't have any jobs lined up. I had like a few $1,000s saved, so I was able to like stay in hotels and do stuff and do that for a few weeks. But after that, I didn't know. I just knew that I couldn't go back home, and it was mostly like pride and ego, really. And it's funny. So like the things that you say like, as sources, right? So like the restaurants you go to, the things the things you can do with the girls when you take them out on dates and like all the stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
some of those are also sources of stress, right? So like in not having any money, once I ran out of money, those sources of stress also went away because like I didn't have any, I couldn't do anything. And so like it was interesting because like I tell people that I was out there partially by choice and partially by circumstance, because there was this weird satisfaction that I felt and fulfillment that I felt in not having to pay rent and not having to pay a car note and not having to pay a phone bill and not having to do those things and not having to present an image of myself. And so that was the hard part to reconcile, because that's when you zoom out, that's not supposed to feel good. You're supposed to see yourself in the center of the volcano. But I didn't feel that way. I actually felt kind of like a comfort, that I hadn't felt ever, because my whole life up to that point had been, what's the next thing? What's the next milestone? And it's interesting when I tell people this, because I'm like, think about what you want in retirement. You want to be able to have your bills paid off and have your house paid off and not have, those are the things that you desire. So like me not having those, those constraints, it felt like a parallel situation in a sense, because I was free and liberated of those bills and of those those outside stressors, because I was already dealing with my own identity, right? So I'm dealing with my own identity. Like, who am I now that I don't have a job? Like, I couldn't be thinking about if I was going to pay the rent, right? It was just not possible for me at the time.
So when you're in the space, right, and you're like, well, okay, great. I'm going to do the thing that I guess traditional culture would deem to be hard, right? Which is I'm going to live on the streets. I'm gonna tough this out. I'm gonna figure it out. But other people see as, and I think that you're not the only person I've ever spoken to about this. They see themselves living off of a grid that they're not even 100% sure that they want to be on. Right? I think a lot of, I think that um, a lot of what you see in homelessness is due to other circumstances, such as possibly addiction, possibly mental illness, possibly um, a person sort of temporarily being not in sync with what they want to do next, right? And then you have like a certain faction of folks that are just like, I'm opting out, right? Like I'm going to opt out of this.
Yeah.
Now, for as freeing as it sounds, I would imagine, and you touched on this earlier, that there is also a sense of danger, right? Because all of the societal um, protections that we get when we have our own places, when we have a routine where we're going to work, where we're moving in those spaces, all of and when we're regarded as valuable, right? That's a whole different conversation about, how much society regards the homeless as valuable, right? But when you're regarded as valuable, you're afforded a certain amount of protection around your own safety, around your possessions, around your personhood. And so while you were going through that, how were you navigating the dangerous part of it, right? Because when you say that you opt in and you opt into a certain level of freedom, I get that, but I also get that that freedom comes with a cost that seems like it's a lot more um, visceral or a lot more sort of primal in the way that you're in the survivor space. So you get a freedom, but it's like this freedom is going to cost you a sense of safety. And so how did you sort of reconcile that? The fact that like you're out here ultimately, just sort of unprotected by the things that, most people kind of wrap themselves in.
Yeah, I mean, there's an acknowledgement of you just know that something can happen, and you're seeing things happen. So like that's a reality versus like a hypothetical scenario.
Yeah.
Right. So the first thing was I accepted that. The second thing was that I just knew I didn't have anywhere else to go. So you just learn how to move in the space, like you learn how to move. You know who the dangerous people are. You know who's guys like who not to stand in front of and talk over, and who not to walk in front of, and not to be where he's at if he's by. Like you just know. And so like it's almost like getting a new job when you go and you're like, who's my office buddy, So like no one's walking around out there by themselves really. Like I had people that I was with all day. So like if you kind of get your tribe of people. And so that keeps you safe in a sense, as long as you stay there. But I mean, one thing was that I kind of got desensitized to the danger over time, because I had lived there for a year and a half and I knew exactly which streets not to walk down. But now, like after being out there for 2 months, you start to kind of get a little more adventurous, and you're like, I do want to see what's down there on that block. I do want to go. My boy's saying we got to go over there because they got this, they got these things and whatever. Or like there's another place to get free clothes over there, but we usually don't walk over there. Like, and just one day you do and you don't die. You know what I'm saying? And so now you're not scared anymore.
Yeah.
And so like it was kind of like that process like just happened over and over again. And I stood in the face of danger several times, and like, was it scary? Absolutely. Did I have moments where I literally thought this would be my last breath? Yes, for sure. But like there was just I didn't have any, like there was no safety net. None of the logic that applies to our regular normal routines applied at the time, because I was either just going to live out there forever, or like I was going to die there. And I didn't really care at the time which one happened, because I just didn't I didn't have a vision. I didn't have the lighthouse anymore. But at the same time, I didn't forget who I was. So like, I didn't forget the other 20 something years of like accomplishments and achievements. I didn't like start talking different or acting different or trying to be a different person. I was still me, but like, so like that allowed me to kind of like balance out the negativity and the depression and the sadness and the apathy, so that I never got too deep down into that, where I was just like, no, I'm gonna just lay out in the middle of this dangerous street.
So in essence, what I'm hearing, and please let me know if I'm sort of summarizing this correctly, is that like you didn't fundamentally change as a person, but the lens in which you saw the world did.
Correct.
Right? You saw the world just differently, like things that possibly were alerts for danger might have been in your previous life, might have been sort of an opportunity to get a resource in this life, right? So like things were sort of shifting, and the way that you approached how you would live started to shift, but you still sort of didn't lose yourself in it to the point where you fundamentally became changed. I mean, we change in every experience, but you didn't fundamentally become so changed that you lost your sense of self.
Correct. Yeah. So like before that, and you're from, you live in New York, so I'm sure you've seen like a corner store with like 60 dudes standing outside before,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Like in Ohio, I've never seen that. You know what I'm saying? But like in San Francisco, when I was out there, like if my boy that I was with at the time said like, "Yo, we got to go over here," we got to go to this guy, this corner store. Like I had never been inside of a situation like that where there's like 20 dudes inside the store,
yeah,
and then there's like 60 dudes outside the store, and you got to still go in there and transact business. And like I had never done that before. You know what
yeah,
I'm saying? So like for me, like there was a fear in that moment, but I'm also like, this is also what they do. So it's like when you travel, and like you're not used to going to the hut to get the jerk chicken.
yeah,
You know what I'm saying? We don't do that here.
yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But like you go over there, like and you realize this is just how people do stuff. And so like the fear barrier breaks down over time.
Got it. I mean, it's also, I think, the way that our brain works, right? Like we start to our brain starts to process repeated experiences, and it starts to change the way that we are triggered by those experiences, or the way that we fear or respond to those experiences. So after a while, right, like you could go to prison, and after a while, you start to assimilate into the culture and into the expectation, because your brain allows it's your brain's process of keeping you calm and keeping you alive, in essence, right? Is for
Yeah.
it to say, well, this is the new dynamic. This is your new circumstance. And in a way, we're going to have to try to figure out a way for you to process this so that you can keep moving on. Otherwise, every traumatic episode we would keep in the forefront of our head, and we would go crazy because we would know that there's danger. We would know that there's 20 guys that's inside the store, and we would become paralyzed and have anxiety, which nothing's wrong with that, because the circumstance would probably call for it, right? But at some point, your brain has to rationalize, like, you still got to go in there anyway. So how do I get you to a space where you can go into that store, transact the business, and come out safely, as opposed to go and have a meltdown because of how scary or concerning the circumstances.
Right. I mean, you walk in there and you think you're going to get robbed, and you're going to get robbed.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like you have to walk in there like I got to go get my stuff, my Fagos or whatever. I got to go get my chips, whatever you're getting, whatever it is.
yeah,
You got to go walk in there and go in there and get that, and walk back out and walk out like you were supposed to be there. And like that's just that, like that's your store. You know what I'm saying? Like that wasn't how I walked in the first time, and I would have never walked in like that if I walked by myself. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying? So like I felt like already I had been in a bubble from school, because school I went from college, high school to college to grad school directly, and then I got a job right after that. All those things like back to back to back. So there were like life things, that like life scenarios I had never experienced, that are teachable moments. You know what I mean? And just like being able to commune with people in different places. Walking downtown Manhattan in like the summertime or during the tourist season is a different vibe. You know what I mean? Than how it feels to walk downtown Columbus, Ohio. You
yeah.
know what I'm saying? And if you don't know how to do that, then like it's going to be anxiety producing. It's going to be scary, and you're going to be fearful. But like you said, like our brains have to. So it was my fight or flight response. It was survive or don't survive. And our innate ability is to find ways to survive. And that's the best part.
So I'm going to transition into the book, but I do have a question. I have two questions that I think will transition this conversation. The first is one in which I think lends itself to this conversation, because so much of my understanding of I Made a Place for You is about sort of introspection and uh, a dissecting of one's own thoughts around themselves and sort of where they fit into the grander scheme of life, right? Spiritually, emotionally, in relationships, um, and so in that, right, like how much of what you experienced in that time period of your life informs what is written in this book of poetry? Like how much of it was what was already in you when you were in grad school, or how much of it sort of came into play once you kind of got out into the world and saw a bit more of it, and saw the spectrum of kind of how people can exist? How much of what you experienced in that time period of homelessness informed the way that you wrote this book or the contents of the book?
Oh yeah, I would say that it completely and wholly informed it. You know, I've been a poet for my entire life, and I've written poetry since I was 4. So I've always had work that I've always written for myself. I've had notebooks full. I've just thrown away things like that. You know, it's sharpening my skills. But like this book, even the decision to pick illustrations to add to it came out of the notion that my experience was so colorful out there. So like there was no way for me to articulate that kind of color in words. And so like for me, I wanted to add the art there as an element to give the reader an opportunity to kind of feel the words in a different way, because it's interesting to me that people will tell me that they don't know whether to look at the picture or the poem sometimes. And I think that's like part of the intention, because like, I want you to feel like you could dive into either. And like it's for me, like they're both there to serve the same purpose. Like, can you see what I'm trying to get you to irrigate in yourself? Right. So like I present the poem, right? And the goal of it is to get people to ask questions of themselves. And I think that's kind of the trick. And so that's the creative part of it for me. So like I've always been, that was the reason why I thought I could write a book finally, because when I came from being homeless, I just knew that like writing a book and seeing my name on the spine of it was on my bucket list. And had I died there, I would have never got to see that happen. So that kind of like kicked me. That was the catalyst for me to decide, okay, no, you have to put pen to paper. You actually have to like make this project real. And so I think that experience, not only like in the content inspired me, but also in the motivation inspired me to actually get the work done.
Dope. Shouts out to Francisco Orzini. Is that
Yep.
a solid pronunciation of the name for the illustrations? Illustrations are super dope. The second thing that I wanted to ask is, how many of the relationships that you formed during that time frame are you still in relationship with? Like, how many of those folks are you still in relationship with, or is it one of those things where you at which is, I think, indicative of any type of relationship. As you grow, people either grow with you or they don't. And, some relationships you keep, some you don't. So do you find that you're still in communication, in relationship with the folks that you met there, or during that time period? Or has it been a situation where, you sort of grown apart, but you still hold a lot of love for those people?
Yeah, it would be the latter. I would say I have zero communication with any of those people.
Got it. Got it. And sometimes I think that's a part of transitioning, right? Like, to your point and example about jobs. Like, some jobs you leave and you're like, oh my god, we're going to be friends forever. And some jobs you leave and you're like, I love those people, but I need to move on to whatever is next for me, right? And it's no sort of love loss. All right, so I'm going to talk about the ones that I love. I'm gonna start with my list for the folks in the folks that are listening and watching. So I made a place for you, Damian White. We're gonna talk about Good Morning. I think was great. Pixie Dust, awesome. Look Away was one of my favorites. Balance Due, Purgatory, and Playing God.
That's a great list.
Is it?
That's a great list. It's a phenomenal list.
Thank you. I mean, you wrote it, so I mean, it's all phenomenal, right? But no, I really, really, really liked it. I think that those are a spectrum of sort of style and thought, and I feel like all of them had a lot of interest. Now, there is a sort of spiritual thread throughout all of this, right? A lot of it is talking about the ideas around God, the ideas around Satan, the ideas around death, the ideas around eternalness. I don't know if that's a word. I make up words here all the time.
I love
That's
it.
okay. There's some sense of, you know, uh, how do I sort of reconcile the things that I've done, uh, and and the person that I want to be with this aspect of a divine, or an aspect of a a scale on my life also being present. And so, when do you find yourself to be a spiritual person?
I do.
Okay.
I would say that I've been on the spectrum, the entire spectrum from, I was baptized when I was 10 in a Baptist church, to complete lack of belief. I've been through all of those. And I would say that while I was there, while I was living homelessly, it was just one of those times when you really have to like figure out, are you the chess player or are you the chess piece, right? So sometimes, when you're doing good and you're like checking off milestones, you're like, I know A is going to lead to B and B is going to lead to C. You start to feel like you're the architect of your life. And so like you can almost feel that God-like feeling, like you're creating your future. You're creating who you are. And I think that like when you don't want to be responsible for the situation that's being created, like i.e. being homeless, you don't necessarily want to take responsibility for that. So then the road always leads back to like, is there another force present? Is there a God? Right. And so like I had to reconcile that moment again for myself. And so that's part of why there is that thread of spirituality woven into the narrative of the book, because it was just part of it. That was part of it was part of allowing myself to ask those questions again. Right. There was a time where I wouldn't even say the name God. Right. There's a time and then I find myself praying and like asking of God, right, out in the streets. And so like, how do you reconcile being both those people? Right. So like, I'm a person that doesn't like to feel like a hypocrite of myself. Right. So I have to deal with that. And so this book was the place where I started to wrestle and play tug of war with those ideas.
So I'm going to read one that is not on the list that I purposely left out, that I also really like. But I want you guys to read it. So I'm not going to read all of it. I'm gonna grab two lines and then the ending lines, because I think that the lines that I'm choosing, though the rest of the poem is going to create context, I think this kind of gives you guys some sense. It's the work is called Devil Bait, and the two lines I'm going to read is: never dare the devil to dance, then never dare the devil to sing. The end of it says, if you do, cradle your blessings, summon a soul's worth of prayers now, for no war is won in worry. Dance and sing as you wish. So you were daring the devil to do some things while you were out there living that life. And you came out of this circumstance with a book written, with a family that you're working on, right? Like with these things, when your support system, right, family, parents, partner, when she's reading this, when your family's reading this, when folks in your life that understand the journey of your story is reading this, do you believe that that this book is able to communicate to them some of how you were feeling, or some of what you were experiencing, both physically and spiritually during your journey? Like, what's been their reaction, or thoughts around the book?
Yeah, I think so. I think that people get the sense that I'm trying really hard to be transparent. And I think that like instead of writing, a memoir, this is it, I did the exact opposite of that. I coded these experiences in language, so like it's not supposed to be descriptions of moments that happened to me.
Yeah.
It's not supposed to be that. I had to distill all those moments down, and I had to figure out how do I funnel that down into something productive and useful and creative. And so these poems became that. So like those experiences, people will learn more about me throughout my life. Like the rest of my life will be the unfolding of how all of that stuff has impacted me, because it's too much to just, it would be too much to just try to jam into a 40-page book of poetry, and even 5 of those, because I could tell you, you and I could sit here and I could tell you terrifying, harrowing stories for 2 days. You know what I mean? So like, instead of that, my goal is to figure out what do I do with those stories and moments, and how do I make them into art?
That would be an interesting podcast, like to do like a late night, like scary life stories, like and just be like, all right, Damon, so what happened at the corner store? And they're like, man, listen, it involved a razor, a can of Four Loco,
And a, t- and a,
exactly, and like
and
a
a
German
tent.
diplomat and a German diplomat. I'm like, man, that's crazy, it's crazy, it's wild, brother, it's wild. All right, so getting back, man, to the idea of support, like in the story that we were discussing earlier, man, you eventually had to come home, right? Like this ends with you eventually making a decision to return, to get that Greyhound ticket and come back. Um, what was your adjustment period like? Like, are you still in your adjustment period? Like, what was it like to sort of be home, be indoors, be with whoever was the person that said that they would receive you? Um, what was that process like, and what did you learn about yourself in looking at what you experienced in retrospect, like and looking back at it? What did you, what in once you were sort of away from it, right? What did you realize about yourself, and what was that transition period like?
It was really difficult in the beginning because I was dealing with the fact that these were the people. So my mom and my grandma were the ones who received me. I was dealing with the fact that these were the same people I was afraid of facing, right? These are the people who I didn't want to come home and look in the eyes and say like, yeah, this is the same kid that was on the honor roll and then went to college on the scholarship. And then like, now I'm like detoxing, right? I didn't want to look them in the face and tell them that. So for me, it's like, it was, they were much more empathetic to me than I was being to myself. So they received me with open arms. And like, I came back to a loving family, the same one I had always had, the same people I grew up in the same house with. And so like, that part was like, that part had never changed. So my perspective shifted in a sense that I just knew I needed to appreciate and be grateful and show gratitude towards these people, and to make sure that I was spending time and being present, as opposed to like seeing them as people I needed to get away from. And like much of that animosity was just me having a chip on my shoulder, you know, carrying the burden of like, I'm supposed to go make it out here in the world and like pull everybody up and save everybody, and like, you know, I'm supposed to be Drake, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's what I'm supposed to be doing, or whoever, you know. And I'm supposed to buy my mom a house and buy my, you know, I'm supposed to do all that. Like, I felt that pressure, being like, I came from a single parent home. There were no men in my house buying my mom anything. You know what I'm saying? I saw 3 women going to work. And so like, I built an identity built that said that I had to be the provider and I had to be all of these things, even though I had never seen that. I had never seen how someone got that. So it was difficult. You know, my role models were rappers. Like, my role models were on TV. They were actors, and you know, so like, it was challenging because I was starting at ground zero again. But I would say like, the adjustment period is over. I'm like in the rebuilding phase, which is very far from the adjustment period. You know, like, I'm good. Like, my mental health is great. I'm I'm firing on all cylinders basically in life. You know, I'm doing things the way that I want to. Now it's just like the foot has to stay on the pedal, and I can't let it up. Like, I'm the only one who knows what it looks like or felt like to be at my lowest. So I can never allow anyone to get me back there. I can never allow a situation to get me back there. So now that's my responsibility.
So here's what's interesting, Damien, because I appreciate what you've said, but there also seems to be this idea, and just hearing your story, right? Just as a pedestrian listening to your story, there seems to be this sense of like pressure, this sense of pressure Hopefully, whoever's being saved right now, I hope you guys make it to them quickly. I hope someone's not being arrested. I hope that someone's being saved. Anyway, so there seems to be this idea of pressure, right? And you described the pressure that was brought on by maybe not having the right diverse set of role models to support your understanding of yourself, right? So you had a very specific set, and then you had the ones that you saw on TV, which we know were only being curated portions of their life, right? And so, and then you also said now it's kind of like, you got to put your foot on the gas. So how are you in your own life ensuring that you don't create expectations that you ultimately feel overwhelmed by? Because I think we all do that, right? We all have the potential to do it if we don't already do it, right? Is that we want to be this version of ourselves, and we push ourselves so hard that sometimes we push ourselves toward anxiety, toward depression, toward all of the feelings that aren't really what we want to embody, but become the byproduct of stress and ego and fear of failing and or succeeding, or not letting people down, and wanting to be our best selves, right? Like, how do you find yourself walking that line where you are being accountable and being responsible to yourself, but also not creating so much pressure that you find yourself sort of wanting to abstain from the parts of life that really bring about growth and progress?
For sure. I mean, I prioritize the parts of life that bring about growth and progress. And I think that the most important way that I've built my routine now is that I want to make sure that I'm filling my day with things that I enjoy doing. So when if I get off of work and I want to come home and write a song or write a poem or draw or whatever I want to do, doodle or whatever I want to do, like I those are things that like I've been looking forward to all day. Those are things that like I want to be able to wake up and do those things, right? So like it doesn't feel like pressure to me. And the only expectation I put on myself now is to feel like I got closer today than I was yesterday. So before that wasn't it. It was like I want the result right now. Like I want to be this right now. And I have to do all the things I can possibly do, exhaust all my energy, emotions, resources, and try to figure out how can I have this right now. And so I've shifted to understanding that like I just need to feel like I'm still getting closer to that thing. I'm not so much it's because I appreciate the journey now, where before I just wanted the result.
Yeah.
So there's no pressure of when I'm just like, all I need to do today is talk to Dion. And I know that like me sharing my story with Dion was me doing something for my own growth and personal development today. And it may benefit someone else. I don't have to think that like today Oprah's going to call me.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know what I mean? But before, that's what I would have been thinking. Like I would have been thinking something like, well, how does this puzzle piece get me to the next puzzle piece? How does this? That would have been that my brain would have just been like mush. You know what I mean? But now I'm able to just be content with the fact that like I'm making steps.
And I think that what's beautiful about that is it allows you to be present, right? Like you're
Right.
not in the future you. You're actually building that future you today, as opposed to having your brain exist in that future space and possibly, sort of being paralyzed by like, well, how does this piece work with this piece? And you become so concerned with like the theory around what you could accomplish that sometimes you don't accomplish anything because you become exhausted by this kind of predictive modeling that you're doing for your life and for circumstances, where when it becomes time for you to do the thing that you actually need to do, you have little to no energy for it because you've expended it all on the theory of what could occur.
And also, like the first problem happened in grad school. Like I had an ideological issue. I'm gonna explain. I'm gonna break it down to you. I had envisioned what a professor's life looked like out of the fact that they got sabbaticals, they got to teach a couple classes, and they get to go home and be with their kids. Like I had glamorized those parts until I got to be behind the veil and see like that's not what it is. You know, it's like when you watch House, the show, or Grey's Anatomy, and it's like everybody's running in there in their scrubs, and then like they say some smart stuff. They do a few cuts, and then like Dr. House walks out like a G. You know what I'm saying? Gets in his car, but like you go to the hospital, and the doctor's sitting there taking patient notes for 6 hours.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so like I stopped being fake with myself. You know, I stopped allowing myself, like there's no, like, to me, if I want to be a writer, for instance, or I want to be a rapper, or I want to be a filmmaker, whatever the case is, I'm a creative person, so I may want to do all those things.
Yep.
Like I have to think about what the day-to-day looks like, and that's what I used to ignore. So the day-to-day would be like, I should be writing a song today, or I should be writing a poem today, or writing some scripts, you know, some lines in a script, because that's what I would be doing every day if I was one of those things. Versus like imagining the glamour of being those things, and then you get there and you don't even have the wherewithal or the stomach to like do the day-to-day work. And that was my problem the first time. So that's how I'm able to stay present and be happy, because I'm basically practicing what it's like to be those people. You know, I'm just practicing what it's like on a day-to-day versus just like glamorizing the fact that they get to get on jets and do the things or speak to on campuses. And that's not the part that's cool to me anymore. Obviously that will come with all that stuff, but like the cool part is that those people are living their dreams and living their truths every day, and waking up and like feeling like they're letting things out of them, and making people feel better and doing good in the world. Like that's the part that people should be jealous about, not like the Rolls Royce. Like I don't care. Like that would be nice. That's cool. But I want to feel good like Care Bear when I get out the Rolls Royce. That's how I want to feel.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think a lot of it is also because we're fed that type of stuff, right? Like we both oddly have on hoodies with Basquiat motifs in it. You know what I mean? Like I have a Basquiat hat that brother gave me outside of the latest Basquiat show. You have on the Basquiat hoodie, man, and it's interesting because I'm well read in different books on Basquiat and sort of that life journey. There is another book that's called The Widow Basquiat, which tells the story of his girlfriend, life partner, as she experienced living with him, right? And what they experienced together. Now, of course, you know, all of it is told from another person's perspective, who is living without, you know, the person who's the intended subject matter being alive to say, yes, that did happen that way, or no, that didn't happen that way. So you got to sort of take it for some of the bias that will ultimately be there. But what it did for me is it humanized the artist in a way that I think oftentimes public figures don't really get to be human. You know, we sort of, in order to make them bigger than life, we remove from them the parts that that don't align with what we want from them, right? So for some people, it's like, Basquiat, man, do drugs, create crazy art, right? For other people, it's be an artist, you know, have social commentary, you know, sink into your inner child. For me, I think what I kind of got into most and early on was the idea of the crown. I just kept seeing this crown everywhere, like the 3-point crown, right? Like I saw the 3-point crown everywhere, and I was just like, man, it's the logo. Like, where is this thing coming from? And then I got tied into the story, and for me, it was like, well, how does art live beyond us, right? How does one create something that is so compelling that it exists in almost every form of art, right? Like rappers' albums had it, t-shirts had it, billboards had it, right? It was everywhere. So with that said, I think that I read the book, and it told a lot of sort of grueling stories about what addiction looks like, and what addiction does to the people that love you, how it isolates, how it harms, how it possibly produces trauma-based work that could be considered genius. And I think for a lot of folks, at least for me, I understood that Basquiat had a drug problem. I think I rationalized it, and to your point, I made it seem like almost aspirational. Like, man, he was out there partying. He was doing all the good stuff. He was creating all the good art. He was hanging out with Madonna, Warhol. Like, he was living the life, right? But then when you hear about the guy sleeping in his own vomit, it sort of makes you go like, man, that's not how artists to create art. Like, I don't need you sleeping in your vomit with a needle in your arm to create art for me. Like, I don't need that. Like, I want you to be happy. I want you to find serenity, find your sense of self. Like, that's what I want, right? Like, I don't need, like, if the cost of producing is to be in trauma and to be in agony and to be in pain, which is so often what we now understand about art, right? Whether it's the Kanye West of the world or whomever, right? We see that. I think, to your point, it's easy for folks to align themselves with the most glamorous parts, right? But unless you've done the work inside of yourself, then all of the other things that come with it, the echo chamber of opinion, the self-harm, the medicating yourself, the sort of slightly being out of touch with reality, all that stuff, especially if you don't have that type of money and resource and support like they have, that can put you in some dangerous spaces. Like, you can be overextended financially. You could be at risk of developing some personality type disorders, right? Where you're just feeding into your ego in such a crazy way, man. So yeah, that book, The Widow Basquiat, guys, pick it up. First pick up I Made a Place for You, Damian White. Boom. Then pick up The Widow Basquiat if you want a reference for that. But I think that you're right, man. That we oftentimes only look at the glamorous parts, and we miss a lot of the cues about and the information that, whether the person wants to give us or not, about how their life really looks. Whitney Houston comes to example just kind of immediately, right? River Phoenix, so many people, man, that where you see this version of someone's life and it seems so great, and then we find out that it was trauma. Trauma was catalyzing whatever they were experiencing. And if you don't know that, then you can be another victim to having trauma catalyze experiences where the goal is to be this thing, but ultimately you don't really know what that thing is.
Yeah, I would say, to play devil's advocate a bit, that like it could also be seen as a silver lining, because for most people these experiences are overwhelmingly traumatic, and they produce regret and resentment, and that regret and resentment will live on for a long time, if not forever, inside of them, with no tangible manifestation of a way that they were able to get it out of them, right? So like this trauma-based art, though, like, though that's where it comes from, it's also a miracle almost sometimes when it does happen, because the odds of coming out of that low dark place with something beautiful and respectable is I feel very low, just from knowing how it feels to have to even motivate yourself to get up and take a shower, let alone like paint that. You know what I mean? So like I would say it's a double-edged sword, but like it's part of the thing that's beautiful about art.
So I agree in a way. I do think that it is a miracle to create art from a traumatic place. I do think that what then happens is people, when they start to commodify and sell that thing, whether it's art, it's music, it's movies, you then become incentivized to not ever leave that sort of place, that sort of way of thinking, right? And even though that place is unhealthy for you, because it produced such a great work, you become incentivized to reenact circumstances consciously or subconsciously that put you in the same place to produce that level of art again, right? And so I can never become free of this cycle because this cycle is what birthed this thing, and therefore that sort of trauma catalyzing the work becomes what I lean into instead of healing or instead of progress. And I think that to me is the sort of scarier part is that if I and if I believe I'm doing my best acting work on heroin, what becomes the incentive for me to get sober? Like, because though I may be a phenomenal artist when I'm sober, because I'm getting all of this attention and accolade and deeming of genius, right? Then I'm afraid that if I deviate from this course that I'm on, that I lose all of those things. And so, in a way, it's like I think that's a scary place to be in, because if you don't have a strong sense of self, if you don't have strong support, you could find that you're on that journey and you haven't even reached the accolades that should put you on that journey in a way. You know what I mean? Like you're doing it to in the hopes of producing that level of art instead of it really being, I don't know, man. Just stay away from guys. Stay away from drugs. Check out your mental health. Like I'm starting to get real like emotional right now because I'm like, man, that's really sad. Like that to me, that's like a really sad place to be in, man. Is where like you can't get off the ride because all you have is the ride, right? So you can't get off of it because once you get off it, it just stops, and that is a scarier thought than to be producing from a traumatic place.
I do not disagree with you. Yeah. I definitely agree with you. I think that it's scary. And that's why it's important for artists to have a strong sense of self. They should have and their own way of understanding who they are at all times, whether that's when they're drinking or not drinking, or they're smoking or not smoking, or don't they should know, if that's because for me, I get into the discussion about like recreational marijuana, right? For instance, like there are people who see smoking out as an escape from their life, and there are people who smoke so that they can be present, so that the voices and the chatter in their head will calm down, and they can sit there with their daughter or sit there with their wife and have an interaction where they're not thinking about the future and their body aching and all those things, right? So like those could be two different people. You know what I mean? And like if they're both artists, I could promise you that the guy that's the second person is probably producing probably producing more consistent work, right? But that artist has a different sense of himself. His sense of himself is that like he's making his best things when his mind's not in the future or worried about the thing that's next or whatever, and he's able to just sit there with his notebook and draw. Like, so I would say that like part of it's just like artists having a strong understanding of like their own identity, and that's a challenging thing because it requires you to irrigate, ask yourself the hard questions, figure out who you are, what you're willing to tolerate about yourself when no one else is looking. Like if you want to pop that pill in the closet when no one else is looking, you have to be the one that's accountable for that and like know that you did that. Even it's not going to be enough to know that nobody else knew at some point. You know what I mean? Yeah. You're going to eventually realize that you have to have your own internal accountability structure and way to figure out like how does your moral compass move? And I think that like it's sad in Basquiat's case that like it didn't work out. It didn't work out how we would have hoped it did.
Exactly. It in looking back at it, right? Yeah, but I think
looking back at it,
right? Like in looking back at it, right? Because there are artists now that are spiraling that we're as a public watching spiral. And I wonder what 10 years from now, 20 years from now, what we'll think about what we're witnessing today, right? Like will we be like, man, like that person was crying out for help, or was it, you know what I mean? Like you just don't know. I think that's the tough thing. There's such a thin line between like artistry, genius, and like existing on a frequency that the common person does not. So you're given more leeway to be eccentric, to be an outlier, because people just don't get it. And in not getting it, you may not necessarily get the help that you actually need, because no one can tell to the common person that they don't know if this is your genius manifesting, or if this is mental illness manifesting, or this is addiction manifesting, right? Because those things can seem very sort of fluid in a way that it's harder to tell kind of in what lens we're supposed to view this person at this point. And I think Basquiat's a great example of the potential for that, where, you see the person, you see how amazing it is, you see all of the chaos that comes with that, right? And instead of going, how's this experience working out for the person, you're like, man, this looks really awesome to me.
Yeah, well, now it's like now those are just valuable pieces. Like people talk about them because the pieces are valuable and rare,
Yeah.
right? Like there were doors in the post, he painted on the doors and the postcards and all those things. Like it's just it's an amazing story. Like I know you said you went to the exhibit, so and I saw it as well. So like seeing the doodles from like his high school like newspapers and things like that stuff is so cool. You know what I mean? But to the average person, still as amazing as his story is, that thing is worth X amount of dollars, and that's all that matters.
Yep.
You know what
Yep.
I mean? So like to me, like part of it's futile in a sense, because if it doesn't always matter, like which lens is going to be predominant, right? So like whether we look at it as like he painted that art out of like mental illness or genius, do either of those outweigh whatever the valuation of that piece is or at auction?
So yes, I actually think yes. I think yes. And this is the reason why. Because we tend to not collect things that don't have compelling stories. And without the compelling story, it doesn't it's not as valuable to be collected, right? It's the story about being on drugs, it's the story about living on the streets and utilizing found art that I think is the compelling part, right? Because it's like you're capturing a story in this moment. And I think that's actually what's amazing about the era that was kind of ushered in the Herring, Warhol, Basquiat time frame, is that that the art and to an extent, you have the Banksies now and the Mr. Brainwashes and all the other guys that are sort of doing it. I think what's interesting about that art is that it's all sort of story driven, right? Like the one piece of wood with a crown on it should not be 1.7 million. Should not. Like all intents and purposes, it should not. It should not be on the same. It should not be valued the same as Renoir or Manet, right? But it is, because the story is so freaking compelling and it was lived, and so it becomes that, because we want a part of that chaos, a part of that trauma, that life, that grandeur, right? That story. And so yeah, I think in a way it's like it's not really about the strokes. It's not really about the amount of days it took to make it. It's not about the story of like the trip to France that produced this amazing work of Lilies. We're like, he wrote an X on a tampon. Just kidding, ladies. Just kidding. I don't know if you ever did, but I'm saying. And that thing is going for like $50,000 now, because he was in the bathroom of Studio 54 when he did it, and Grace Jones was in the other stall doing some blow, and it's like becomes this sort of massive thing where you're like, this story is so compelling. I don't actually care about the artwork, to be fair. Like, I just want a piece of them, of that story, of that life. I want a piece of it. I want to align myself to that story, that time in this person's life, or this time in this person's history. And the size, the type of the art, be damned.
I completely agree with you, because I recently told my mom that like my goal for this year was to be able to look at all the things on my wall and be able to tell a story about them. So like that's what I want, right? So I want to be able to tell stories about those things, like with a piece. I got this in Paris at the thing with the guy he painted outside the Eiffel Tower. Like I want to be able to say that, you
Yeah.
know. And so I definitely get what you mean. And yeah, that's it's crazy how that turned in, how that emotion and that desire turns into a commodity.
It is, and that's what I'm saying, right? And so to everyone who is watching the Basquiat story, it's like, how do you then start to parse out the genius from the trauma, from the addiction, from the right? Because it all seems like it's a part of the same story. So who am I to say that I shouldn't do heroin in order to produce art that looks like his art to get to that point, right? Like who says like whether I should be in a safe, happy space or if I need those sort of motivators in order for me to access the part of me that says, hey, you're more likely to be um, commodified, famous because this story that you're doing is compelling. But listen, I got another piece for y'all. I'm gonna read a passage from Playing God. And guys, I know that Damian should probably be doing this, but I decided to do this independently so you guys can experience his work. So him and I didn't cover the fact that I'd be reading parts of his work. So don't blame him or me because I'm not trying to steal this man's thunder. All right, Playing God. And by the way, I may not be reading this in the way that he sonically intended for it to be read. So also forgive me on that. There's probably another better version. Go check out Damian. He's going to give you his information in a bit. Check him out when he does his next reading. Go see that reading so that you can actually hear the way that it's supposed to be read in the way that he intended. All right, Playing God. I gave myself God's glory. He lent it to me briefly. My shoulders buckled beneath its magnificence. To be godly is not to be God. Which I think is a great in cap to the conversation that we just had. Listen, Damian, on Man vs. Brand, we ask two things of everyone that's on the show. And so I'm going to ask them to you. I feel like you're going to have some awesome answers. So, guys, get ready and let's get some recommendations in. So, Damian, on any streaming platform, podcast, book, what's something that you recently consumed that you thoroughly enjoyed?
Sure. So I listen to a podcast called The Cheat Code all the time. It's a music podcast from the music industry, with some pretty heavy hitters from in the industry. One of them, her name is Wendy Day, and she helped with like the Cash Money deal and like Master P deals and stuff like that. I really enjoyed listening to the last episode because the topic was, can you measure success? Right. So like a lot of times they're talking about musicians, but like I apply it to just anyone who's trying to achieve something. Like we're moving forward with no measuring stick. We don't know what the tick marks are that say like, no, that's success. We just want to like, it's really a look. It goes back to what you said earlier. And that's the scary illusion of all those things, is that it's a look that you're waiting for yourself to look like, right? Versus having actual tangible ways to measure yourself. So like listening to that podcast just reminded me that like you have to have clear goals. And to our point earlier, like they don't have to be stressful. You just have to know what they are.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You have to know what they are in the future, and then you can like adjust to that. And it was just a good reminder right now when like I kind of have felt more stagnant because like I'm not writing as much right now. I'm not like, the book's already out and things like that. It's like, how do you make sure that you still feel the momentum, but just remembering that like that was a sprint. Like that was there was a year and a half before like I had the book in my hand. Yeah. So remembering that like all those little milestones along the way still mattered on the journey. And like, those are the actual true measurements of success along the way.
Absolutely, man. I think that it's important that we don't lean into dysmorphia, that we see ourselves for who we are in this moment, and that we're able to put into context where we are today and how we got here, instead of sort of looking at ourselves with this sort of distortion that may not necessarily accurately represent what we're experiencing and who we are. Because to your point, right, our measuring sticks are all over the place, right? Like today I wake up and I wrote 3 things and I feel successful. tomorrow I stayed in bed and I might have needed that moment of a mental relaxation, but I'm like, now you're lazy all of a sudden, right? Yesterday I was successful. Today I'm lazy, right? And so it's like, how do we not become dysmorphic in our stuff? So definitely cheat code. That's one. Secondly, on any streaming platform, podcast, book, what's something that you thoroughly enjoy that people may not necessarily know about you, right? So it may not be top of mind, like, people are like, they know that you listen to cheat code, that's something that you thoroughly enjoy. But what's something that you enjoy that folks may not necessarily know about?
So I'll give you two things. One, I watch like everything about ancient Kemet and Egypt. I watch all the things, all the shows, all the YouTube videos, all those things. I also watch an unimaginable amount of battle rap. I love battle rap because I've loved rap music forever, but battle rappers have always because they don't have to stick to the same meter rhyme scheme like constraints of the song, the
Yeah.
way that they are able to use words, stretch sounds, do like those kinds of different like lyrical acrobats. I've always really loved watching them. And so I watch a lot of battle rap, and I watch a lot of National Geographic shows and stuff like that, so I can learn about, we're still trying to figure out how they built the pyramids supposedly. So
All right, cool. So talk to me about battle rap. The Egypt thing, I think I kind of can sink into a bit more, right? Like, do you think that battle rap? So I'll give you an example. To me, battle rap feels like mixed martial arts. Like it's like it's there, and I know that it's profitable. I know that folks dedicate their entire lives to it, and I know it's not like being a mainstream boxer or being a mainstream rapper, but I feel like it's it has such an own unique community with its own unique players in it that it's hard to jump in the middle, right? Like it's harder for me to jump in the middle than it is in the same way that it's hard for me to jump into the middle of like IFC, right? Mm-hmm. Because I'm always like, it looks interesting, but I don't know who these people are, and I don't know who to root for, and I just don't know, so I just tend to turn it off. So talk to me about how you got introduced to battle rap. Was it in school? How did you how did you get introduced to it? And who are some of the people that's doing it right now that you're like, yo, this person's a superstar, or this person gets it to me every time I listen to them? Give me some players and tell me how you got introduced to it.
Sure. So I would say that I rap. Number one, let's just start there. I rap, and so I'm a songwriter. I write songs. But for the last, I would say since 2013 or 14, I was watching a lot of poetry, slam poets. I wanted to see who the best. When you're a writer, it's competitive, right? So I want to see who's doing it the best. Who are the best people, right? So I started watching the videos with the most views for the poetry slams, and the videos with the most views for the URL smack leagues, and the gates of the gardens and all these places. And I wanted to see who are the people. So I watch a lot of Chef Trez, that's a name, Chess, Hollow the Don.
No, come on, listen, because folks, I'm definitely gonna follow this up, and other people are going to too. So I'm gonna and I put these in the show notes, so I'll serve up links to those people's Instagram, so that folks, if they want to follow them, can listen to it, man.
It's a guy named Prep. I would say those are the people. JC, that's another name. Those are the people I watch the most. But I would say my favorite is probably Chef Trez. He's just very lyrical in a way where he's able to tell his story woven throughout his battle raps, and the punchlines are just so hard, just knock you out. Literally, it's just crazy. So big fan.
Cool. To the folks that are probably going to skewer me when they listen to this, I definitely said IFC. I know that's the independent film thing. I meant UFC's Ultimate Fighting. Guys, please don't beat me up. MMA is not my thing. I said that in the beginning. So IFC, UFC, it's not the same thing, but in that moment, it kind of was. All right. So Damian, for folks that want to get more of your content, that want to purchase the book, that's interested in what you're going to do next, how can they connect with you? How can they purchase the book?
Absolutely. So I have a website. It is DamianWhiteWrites.com, DAMIAN. And then my Instagram is at Damian K White. Those are the main two platforms I'm focusing on right now.
Cool. All right. So that's Damian White. He's written this book, I Made a Place for You. You see that artwork? It's kind of kicking. Check him out on those platforms. Check him out on Instagram. Go to the website, purchase the book. I appreciate you, man, for coming out, for sharing your story, for being open and candid and transparent about what you experienced. Oftentimes we're able to tell the story once we've gotten the win, but it feels very much like, to me at least, like you're still in process, that this isn't the definitive win for you, right? That this is just one step in a longer part of your process, a longer part of your journey. And I appreciate you for sharing this piece with us. I am Dion Brown. That's Damian White. Continue to support Man versus Brand. It's a D with a color at the end. We both have on Basquiat stuff. Man, listen, this is a podcast waiting to happen. All right. Check us out on all your streaming platforms and on YouTube. Thank you guys for supporting this channel. As always, I love you guys. We'll talk soon. Bye.